program might contain strong language. If you think you may be offended, switch off now.
Hey everybody, welcome to Watch Mojo's Inside Podcast. I'm your host Rob, and with me is Ashkan and Watch Mojo's CEO and co-founder. How are you, Ash?
Very good. Yourself?
Doing great, thank you. For any viewers who are new to this podcast, we started it earlier this year by covering 20 episodes on YouTube's history, their 20-year history, in tandem with Watch Mojo's 20-year history. And since then, we've graduated on to numerous varying topics. Week to week, we've covered things like, refresh my memory, Ash, we've covered
America, censorship, media, AI, capitalism, and I think last week we did Iran, given that we felt there might be some, increased tensions in the area. Yes. And we thought, why wouldn't we today cover?
Yeah, because, it wasn't controversial enough, the things that we spoke about last week. No, I'm joking. People may have some opinions on today's episode, but we just want to say up front that, this is meant for informative and historical purposes, first and foremost. This is not to choose sides or, single anybody out, but there was a recent ceasefire. And so this topic has been in the news. And you posted recently on X, something pertaining to the conflict, which got over 70,000 views. So why don't we start by going through that?
Sure. I mean, I've covered, to be honest with you, this is actually a little artifact from June 1994. I'm aging myself. I was 15 or 16 probably in high school. And, I was born in Iran, moved to Canada when I was 5. So I didn't really pay too much attention to the Middle East. When you leave an area that's kind of, in conflict and in flames, you kind of, turn your back to it, especially when you're young. But I was always very much interested in history and politics and whatnot. And, I was always obviously paying attention to, even then, a conflict between Israel and Palestine, which really has been going on for decades. But it wasn't until 1994, when as a 16-year-old, I was just kind of like, following the news. And there was a Israeli, I think he was a physician, but ultimately he was a terrorist, who went into the Ibrahimi Mosque in Hebron, the tomb or the cave of the patriarchs, and he killed like a bunch of Muslim prayers. People were praying. Mm-hmm. And so, I was in high school. In my high school, even though I was born Muslim, I was really more atheist. And, I had a lot of Jewish friends, and this was just in an area where there was just a lot of Jewish students who were kids I grew up with. And yeah, it was kind of like the first time when I really leaned in to kind of just be like, well, what would compel an individual to do that, to go into a house of worship and kill others in the name of God? And then the next year in 1995, Yitzhak Rabin was killed by, I think, a gentleman named Yigal Amir, also an Israeli, an extremist. And the Amir was upset that Rabin was, inching closer to something resembling peace. A fleeting mirage, if ever there's been one in this conflict. And so I kind of really started to lean in more. And I wasn't necessarily like looking at it solely through the prism of religion. For me, it was also always about land dispute. It was about pride and ego. It was a lot about, the things we cover in the show.
Yeah, a lot of those 7 deadly sins that you keep referencing.
Yeah, and here was manifested through a religious land dispute that, you could argue goes back decades or it goes back millennia. But to me, ultimately, as somebody that has always, you guys work with me, I'm always balancing playing devil's advocate. So if I speak to somebody who goes, Israel is promised this land by God, Palestinians are terrorists, I'm like, well, hold on, have you thought of this? And if people are like, Palestinians are the most noble cause and Israel is a genocidal state, I'm like, okay, but did you consider this, right? So I was always very, not so much neutral, but like I've alluded to it, that like one of the first jobs I applied for was to do PR for Greenpeace. I never thought of being an entrepreneur. But one of the things I wanted to do is I was like a young person, like teenager, was to eventually, I was so naive. I was like, I could one day bring peace. I could be a mediator and sit down with Palestinian Muslims, but also Christian Palestinians and others, and the Israelis who were more Zionist, and bring peace. And then I kind of as I got older, seeing the conflict just go on and on, I realized, while I like both groups of people on an individual basis, and I'm going to say things that are going to upset both, sometimes one side the other.
Mm-hmm.
These are two of the most intellectually dishonest groups I've ever come across. Like forget religion. Just if you look at what the belligerence case is, it's just two very intellectually dishonest groups.
So let's dig into that. Why do you say that they're very intellectually dishonest, both sides?
I mean, in no real order, but like anecdotally, let's say if the Palestinians point to the Nakba, like let's say 1948, and they're like, this catastrophe happened and we lost over half of our land. And I understand as a human being, it's a lot easier for Israel to say, oh, we'll take half of this land and then we'll get more over time. For them, relative to their previous position, this was a gift from, Yahweh, like this was wow, doesn't make up for the Holocaust, but it's kind of like things happen for a reason. So I understood why Palestinians were like, well, why are we giving up half this land? But if you're going to go back to 1948, well, then why don't you go back to hundreds of years ago or thousands of years ago? Again, I'm an atheist. I say I'm agnostic. I don't necessarily believe in divine revelation. I don't necessarily believe that God promised anybody any land. That's their belief. So I kind of go, okay, that's your belief. That's good. So, both sides are very selective with when a conflict starts. And we saw this more recently with October 7th, where, one side was pretending like history started then. And I was like, well, wait a minute, there's some, context. And without defending it or justifying it, but I was like, you do need the context for it. And then on the other side, yeah, I mean, you do have, a group that was basically, given a land on biblical grounds almost, but in some ways, like I also understand that like, World War II happened. And so you had this Austrian German failed painter who became a genocidal, dictator and who killed millions of people, including Russians and Gypsies and Poles, but 6 million Jews. And so I understood that, like, well, to the Israeli contingency, like, why would the Palestinians give a damn about what the Germans, did to you? Why should they pay the price, right? And really what I realized very quickly was neither of these sides really want peace. And neither of these sides empathize with the other. And I know somebody's going to go like, well, why would we empathize with somebody that's killed us for generations? And the other side will say, well, why would we empathize with somebody who celebrated on October 7th? But again, those are isolated events in a much longer conflict. And I don't necessarily think that, these two sides want peace. They kind of want to they want a future that is unrealistic and that guarantees decades and centuries of further conflict.
Yeah. As somebody who is not overly educated in this topic but hears a lot about it, does it really come down to neither side being willing to compromise? Is that why ultimately a solution can't be found? Is that they just both want what they want with no flexibility whatsoever?
Well, you should point out that like there obviously are people on both sides who are peace, who are the dovish side. But the reality is they're in the minority, until October 7th. Well, before we get into October 7th. So let's just like outline for those like you who may be not super familiar. So, if you go back, the land of like what is now like Israel/Palestine was actually Canaan, Canaan. And that's the cradle of Semitic civilizations. And so the term, the kingdom of like Israel and Judea is historically, I don't think that is contested. And that's an area that eventually was conquered by Babylonians and the Persians of the Persian Empire, and eventually Greeks and Romans. And it was really in like, I think the 2nd century after Christ, where the Romans, who were at the time ruling through the Roman Empire, they wanted to punish the Jews for a revolt that they were doing. And so they named it Syria Palestina. So the word Palestine comes from there. It was just, the Romans that gave that name. And then obviously Jews, for many reasons, it's widely, I'm not saying anything new, were persecuted. And as, one reason why Cyrus the Great is so beloved by, and referenced in the Torah was because as in the 6th century BC, he let the Jews, he freed them, he let them go back to modern day Israel to rebuild their temple, right? So, but by and large, the Jews were always like super discriminated. And that post that I put on X, on X was that. It was basically, the point was, when I was 8, whipping open the World Book Encyclopedia and I would read about the Jews, you would read about the Holocaust and all these other things. And you saw them as victims, even though in media and finance, it's a well-represented, successful cohort, super impressive group. You've seen the stats, the number of Nobel Prizes vis-a-vis the total population is obscene. But so the point was that when like the previous generation, when you'd read about the Jews, they were the victims. They were the victims that through many things were able to conquer and be resilient and come back. And then they made the desert bloom, and whether it's propaganda or legit, and the truth is always somewhere in the middle. But my point was that, if you look at this generation, rightfully or wrongfully, they're going to think of the Jews as the perpetrators of a genocide in Gaza. And we can discuss how the UN defines genocide, the 5 conditions, whether there's intent or not. We're not here to discuss like international law and stuff, but agree or disagree, there's a lot of younger people that will associate Israel with that. And I was saying that's kind of a shame, it's like you should care about your reputation. And then the second one, I'm a guy that's been empathetic with the Palestinian cause going back 30 plus years, despite the fact that as an Iranian, I don't like the fact that they freaking supported Saddam Hussein and many other things. But I'm not commenting as a biased Iranian. I'm just commenting as a human wearing like a historian or sociological hat. But the issue was then also that the Palestinian cause has been hijacked now. You know what I mean? Like, as much as there's a lot of people, moderates, who may empathize with their plight, when you see just anti-West, anti-capitalism, obviously also anti-Semitic people in that group, just ride, the cause. I don't know if long-term either side is going to benefit. There's going to be a lot of people who are going to view the Jews now as the bad guys and no longer as like these victims of others' prejudice, and ergo they kind of overcame the odds. But I also think that you really have to be intellectually dishonest to think that Palestine is a country, meaning what are the borders? Who is the leader? Where's the capital? It's very easy to be like, free Palestine and I believe in a Palestinian country, but those are 3 questions that everybody should answer before you make that claim. I don't think anybody could say intellectually honestly that like this has been gotten them any closer, in tangible terms. Anyway, so as the Jews over the centuries and millennia were being persecuted, undoubtedly many of them left and they went to Spain and Europe and other places, including Iran, which used to house the 2nd biggest community after Israel. And they were kicked out for many reasons from many countries, which added to like the tragedy of their history, as equally tragic with the Palestinians have had to endure. But so at some point, I think what happened was this confluence in like the late 19th century with the rise of Zionism by Herzl, who was not even, I was going to say Theodor Herzl, who was not even like a religious person, ironically. So that's why I go, this is not necessarily just like a religious conflict as much as it's ideological, as much as it's monetary. It's always financial as well, but it's land, it's pride, it's ego, and all that. And so really, you had this movement amongst like Zionists for a homeland for the Jews that I think probably would have gone nowhere were it not for this little Austrian painter with a funny mustache who went out and decided to, the final solution to kill 6 million of them. And then that obviously changed the course of history.
Yeah. Can you define Zionism for anybody who might not know what that is?
Zionism, to keep it short and sweet, is the belief that like might add some context, but it's ultimately the belief that, sure, God promised the Jews the land of Israel, and there should be not just this country named Israel, but the clincher is that it's an ethno-state. Like it's the Jewish state. And again, somebody on the comments might say, well, the Palestinian Arab Muslims who live in Israel have certain rights, and there's a judge, and but I'm not disputing any of that. But I think the critics of Israel that are not just anti-Semitic and just going to bash them, like let's say if there's, and there are a lot of people that legitimately go, well, I don't believe in an ethnic state, right? I think there's a lot of reasons to and we're going to show a documentary. I saw some people saying, oh, did WatchMojo get their $7,000 for this post? Yeah, moron. Why don't you just watch and you'll see the clips that I'm going to play, which are going to be pretty devastating for both sides, to show that these are two very intellectually dishonest groups. But yeah, so then the issue is you could criticize Israel for a lot of things, but ultimately Zionism is that Israel is entitled to have a Jewish state where there's one set of rules ultimately for the Jews, and then there's this set of rules for others. And Zionism today, though, has become this kind of like weird acid test where everybody's like, well, I'm not anti-Semitic. I have no problem with the Jews. My buddy's a Jew, my neighbor's a Jew, my colleague's a Jew type of thing. But they're like, I'm just anti-Zionist. But I think 90% of Jewish people are Zionists. Now, again, you could complain and criticize and say, well, then why is your ass living in America? Why don't you go there? But the flip side of that argument is, to the people that say, why don't you go live in Israel? Those are the same people that say, well, no, Israel should not be a Jewish state. You know what it is? So it's kind of weird. Like I go, when you see these protests, the pro-Palestine crowd, most of which probably cannot point Palestine on a map, let alone know the history. When you're out there saying, you know, IDF is bad and Jews are bad and Israel is evil, well, you're justifying, moron, that there should be maybe a state for these people that, not perfect, nobody is, but that have historically been persecuted, right? And if you are against that, you're not, I think, in my humble opinion, helping Palestinian people. You're kind of misleading the Palestinians. And I'm going to show another clip where it's like more of an Arab social commentator, where he'll talk about what his views on Palestine are. And it's to say the Arabs have given up on Palestinians. It's only stupid Iran that still believes, you know, we're going to sell out our own people to save these Sunnis who, I don't believe in any of that stuff, but these Sunnis who don't even like the Shias in Iran, who sided with Iran's enemy, Saddam Hussein. So it's just like it's just a shitty situation when there could be peace, but not under the terms that either side would accept, meaning it's going to be generations of conflict to come.
How has the rise of nationalism changed the game here? Because it's no longer just a question of, you know, faith and religion. There's a lot of political elements to it now as well.
Well, look, that's an interesting point, because you could argue that, first of all, social nationalism, like, so Nazis started this problem by having the Holocaust. But I think the difference is that on the Jewish side, you know, people also criticize the Jews because they're like, even if you're like a Jew living in Canada, you're more loyal to, if not Israel, at least Judaism. And I think that's a fair criticism, but that's just people who are Jewish are very, I mean, a lot of Jews are actually atheists, but they still, that's their identity. You know, whether you agree or not, that's their identity. Like, you can't change that, right? So the Jewish, like, aspirations for like an state of Israel, which is predominantly Jewish, that is a form of nationalism. Now, Arab nationalism is a bit different. In the 20th century, you had strong leaders in Egypt and other places who were kind of both strong men domestically, but they were kind of promoting this pan-Arab nationalism, like from Morocco to Iraq, Iraq. You had this bloc. Now, the reality is these people don't get along. Like Egyptians and Lebanese and Syrians and Morocco. I mean, that's to think that they're all the same is a bit, naive. But the bigger issue with regards to this context is that Islam, it's a religion, obviously, but it's a political movement. In fact, it's the most impressive movement in history, where 1400 years ago, you had Muhammad, who said, God has spoken to me through this archangel Gabriel, and this is a better version of Judaism and Christianity that were built on premises of Zoroastrianism. And if you don't convert, don't pay a tax, and stand in our way, we kill you. So yeah, that's a pretty effective customer acquisition model, if you think about it. So it's grown and grown and grown, and it's more about the ummah, you know. So this also actually, your question is like the follow-up is more interesting, that Israel is more a thorn in the side of Arab pride, Muslim pride, of like, hey, we were able to conquer out of the Arabian Peninsula everywhere. Like the Umayyads, the Caliphates was the biggest empire, much larger than the Persian Empire, much larger than the Greek and Roman Empire. But there was this one land that today sticks out the size of New Jersey. And so you've heard me say, like, this glass is literally half empty or half full. This is just water, not vodka. But this glass is half empty or half full. I look at the world as it's half full because that's the way I like to live. But for a lot of the Arabs and Muslims who all sold out the Palestinians, you know, Jordan and Egypt ruled over the West Bank and Gaza, yet they never said, we declare a Palestinian state. You know, if you look at the DNA of many people in Jordan, it matches the Palestinian DNA a bit more. And so Palestine is no longer, sadly, the plight of the Palestinian people, but it's kind of become more this catch-all, you know, that for some, it's just like a reminder that the Arabs lost the war in 48 and 67 and 73. And time after time after time, the Palestinians were, now you could argue whether it was sincere or not, but they were offered something, even if it was Machiavellian. We're going to offer them a crappy deal for them to turn it down. That's politics. That's diplomacy. That's what I'm getting at, that you either have to mediate and come to a kind of almost a stalemate where you swallow some of your pride and you know, like the way I work is it's like a Venn diagram. You and I might disagree on 95% of things, but the only way we're going to come to some kind of agreement is by focusing on that 5% and then over time expanding. The problem with Israel-Palestine is there's maybe 0.1% of agreement, and that just gets washed away from the noise and the distractions, right? And one more thing, and then I want to play a couple, unless you have a question right away, I want to play two videos. And before people go ballistic, one video is coming from Israelis who lived during the Nakba. It's enlightening. The other video is from more modern times in Arab. So let's start off with, and this should shut up the 7,000 peanut gallery section crowd. So let's start with an outtake of a documentary called Tentura.
Okay, let's do it.
Can we go to that?
הרגנו בהם, בלי נקיפת מצפון.
הרגת, אז עשית דבר טוב. הייתי מוכן להרוג.
אני אספר לה שאני הייתי רוצח.
עד היום רק שהייתה אקדח, אתה תהרג את כולם.
יאללה, רפו אותם כמו חרוב, חניהם.
בזמן קרב, אם מישהו הרים ידיים, משהו כזה. לא לקחתי שבויים.
כמה אתה חושב אנשים הרגת ככה?
לא ספרתי. אני לא יכול לדעת בחיי.
הוא תפס אישה, חתיכה צעירה, נכנס לבית אחד, הכין חדר מיטות, עם מיטה, פרטה לזיין אותה.
הילדה חזרה לגיל סמרטוטיה.
אחד אנס שם איזה ילדה בת 16, משהו כזה. אתה מבין? אבל זה מכוער מאוד. היה לנו בחור אחד, הוא נפטר, הוא היה פרא אדם. הוא לקח פשוט מאוד ורצח אותם בתוך המכלאות. חוטי ברזל כאלה, עגולים כאלה, אספו כל הגברים. הם יושבים שם, כל העם, על הרצפה. ובא מישהו ולוקח תת מקלע ומתחיל זה, מחליף מחסנית, שלקחו את הלוויורים ורדפו אחרי חבר'ה ושרפו אותם. זה היה משהו זוועתי, וזה אסור לספר, אני לא אדבר על זה.
מלחמה זה מלחמה.
All right, I mean, we heard enough. So this was a documentary, one of many that have been produced, interviewing, you know, Israeli soldiers in the 40s, 50s, whatever, who admit to these things. So when I say that there's like a very intellectually dishonest pair of groups, it's because like on October 7th, which was a horrific war crime, you know, but
Not to downplay, yeah.
No, but on October 7th, you cannot pretend that like this was out of nowhere and it was like, you know, day one of this conflict.
Yeah.
And it's like Gandhi used to say, an eye for an eye and everybody's blind.
Mm.
You could very easily look at the timeline of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and pick an arbitrary moment and come away with a conclusion that is really incomplete and, dare I say, false. Because this goes back, right? Like there's people like Sabra and Shatila, Der Yassin. I mean, I've read all of these things. I've seen so many documentaries. At some point, you become not numb, but you become like, there's no more pain to experience because you're like, this sucks, you know. But the reason why this sucks, and again, blame Israel all you want, blame the IDF, but the IDF and Israel, it's not their problem, Palestine. And in fact, it is when you're an occupier, according to UN, but that's not, I don't mean it literally. What I mean is, if you want to be like self-determination, you have to look in the mirror and you have to start with yourself. But the problem with the Palestinian people's dream of statehood is the Arab countries are equally to blame for the way that they've kind of bastardized the Palestinians, turned their backs to them. There's a massive border with like barbed wire and everything on the Egyptian side, keeping Palestinians out. Is that Israel's fault? Again, blame Israel if you want. I've written, I mean, if you go through on my X account, you know, like I bash both sides. But I think if you really are a Palestinian, you could keep blaming Israel, you could keep blaming damn America. But I think you need to kind of really say, what do we do for statehood? And what can we do with the, you know, is there anything that the Arab states can do? And the reality is it's not. Now, before talking a little bit about that, let's play clip 2. Now, this is, I think, more of like just a social media commentator, but not saying I agree or disagree, but this is a fairly common perspective from many Arabs in power. Not talking about the main street in Cairo. I'm not talking about Damascus and, you know, the average person that's like, but the governments, this actually is pretty representative. So, Ivan, let's play clip number 2.
السعودية ما بقى شيء ما أعطتكم إياه، حتى دولة أسست لكم دولة، الملك فهد. يوم ريغان يطلب منه تمويل ثوار الكونترا قال له وحدة بوحدة أبي دولة الفلسطين، قال له أبشر، ووقع الخطاب دولة الفلسطين، وعلم الملك فهد عرفات إنه حصلنا دولة فلسطينية. هرب عرفات ما شافوه إلا بعد 10 سنين من هالكلام هذا. هرب ما يبي دولة فلسطينية. كلكم ما تبون دولة فلسطينية لأن أساسا ما لكم قضية ولا لكم دولة ولا لكم أرض. هذه أرض إسرائيل بالقرى، وأنتم شتات رومان ملفقين، مغول وتركمان وشركس وأرمن وغجر، ما لكم حق بفلسطين. فلسطين هذه دولة إسرائيلية لبني إسرائيل، وبني إسرائيل لمعلوميتكم بني إسرائيل هذولا عيال إسحاق، وحنا يا العرب عيال إسماعيل، وإسحاق وإسماعيل أخوين، أبوهم إبراهيم عليه السلام، يعني هذولا عيال عمنا. لكن أنتم منين جيتوا؟ أنتم وش دخلكم بالموضوع؟ أنتم يا الشتات يا الغجر يا المغول يا التركمان يا الشركس يا الرومان يا بقايا الشعوب، إيش دخلكم بالموضوع؟ إيش دخلكم بالسالفة؟ إيش دخلكم بيننا؟ هذا بني إسرائيل على أرضهم، ما لكم أرض أنتم ولا لكم قضية يا جماعة. أنتم أدوختونا واشغلتونا. والأقصى، الأقصى لمعلوميتك ما عندكم أقصى، ما في شيء اسمه أقصى، في شيء اسمه القدس. المسجد الأقصى اللي ورد ذكره هو بالجعرانة 29 كيلو على الطائف، وكان المسجدين، المسجد الأقصى والمسجد الأدنى. المسجد الأقصى حقكم بناه هشام عام 72 هجري، كيف يسرى محمد له وهو مبني عام 72 للهجرة؟ يعني بعد وفاة محمد ب60 سنة. تضحكون على مين أنتم؟ تضحكون على مين؟ الفلسطيني أنت ما أنت عربي ولا لك أرض ولا لك قضية. الأرض أرض إسرائيل والقضية قضية إسرائيل معكم. كان إسحاق شامير ورابين وشارون وجولدا مائير والثاني والله ما أدري شو اسمه، هذول كانوا أبطال، تدري ولا لا؟ لكن نتنياهو جبان، لأن نتنياهو ما حرككم، ما أدري وش يبي بهالأسلحة مكدسها عنده. يا أدمي يا نتنياهو أحرق هالعصابات هذه وهالشتات وهالملفقين وريح نفسك وريح العالم منهم وريحنا احنا منهم. ليش مخليهم؟ ليش فتح لهم الحدود يهاجرون؟ إن راحوا للأردن سووا ويلون الأسود، وإن راحوا للكويت انهبوه يوم صدام احتله، انهبوه يلبسون لبس الجيش العراقي وينهبوه. الخسة والنذالة والحقارة ما يتركونها، هذه تربيتهم وهذا دمهم وهذا عرقهم. ليش ما تريح العالم منهم يا نتنياهو إذا أنت رجال وبطل؟ ها؟ الله يلعنكم ويلعن حتى نتنياهو اللي ما خلصنا منكم، لأن نتنياهو تارك لكم الحبل على الغارب، والمفروض نتنياهو هو اللي يأدبكم وهو اللي يخلص العالم من شروركم. أنتم شر في أي دولة تحطون فيها يا الفلسطينيين، شر منزل ولا بكم رجل. أنا مستعد أنام عند يهودي ولا أنام عند فلسطيني. أنا مستعد أقلط يهودي في بيتي وأغديه وأوكله وأشربه ورقده، ولا أدخل فلسطيني في بيتي.
So I don't agree with everything he says, but directionally, the purpose of this was to show the Palestinians have been sold out by the Arab states more. I think this is just the Arabic commentator. It's not or anything. But I mean, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia will say on the one hand, yeah, you know what, unless there is a Palestinian state, we're not going to sit down with America and join the Abraham Accords. But he also says, I don't give a damn about Palestinians. And if anybody at the Mecca shows up with a Palestinian flag, yeah, they're going to get a beat down by the Saudi cops. So it's very easy. And this was my point. I didn't expect 80,000 people to read it or whatever. It was just to go like, hey, the Palestinian cause today is hijacked and it doesn't serve Palestinians. But again, I'm not here to tell Palestinians what to do per se, but I'm just saying this isn't like going in the right direction. So I do want to spend like maybe just a couple minutes to give like what happened from 48 to 10-7 basically.
Yeah.
So after World War II, it wasn't just that Hitler went maniacal and killed a bunch of Jews and people were like, oopsie, what can we do about this? In the States, Truman was running for election and there was a growing Zionist lobby that was kind of pushing and people felt bad. And, you know, these people are promised Israel, so they're not going to go give them Karlsruhe in Germany, right? So they were given this land. 1948, all the Arab states invaded Israel when it declared independence. Israel, which was kind of like a emerging new country, defeated all these because Arab governments are fundamentally incompetent, corrupt. It's not well-run, functioning machines. It's governments that just want to preserve their power. So all the Arab states invaded, and that's when you had like close to 1 million, I think 750,000 Palestinians that the Arab states said, you should leave because like we're going to bring down the boom on Israel. So when the Palestinians left, that's kind of how they became refugees living in Jordan, Egypt, Syria, and elsewhere, Lebanon. And so slowly but surely, and then the same thing happened in 67, the Six-Day War, Seven-Day War, and then 73, the Yom Kibbutz War, where again, the Arabs were kind of trying to, you know, deal with the Israeli issue. And Israel always managed to come out ahead. And sometimes, yeah, they preemptively sent in their jets and destroyed all the jets that Egypt and others had. But the point I'm getting at is this is war. This is conflict throughout history. You know, we're in Canada. I empathize with the Aboriginal as well, but the Aboriginal, their origins are from Siberia. Facts. They came from modern day Siberia thousands of years ago and they settled here and then they were killing each other. And then there was another group that came, the whites, that then started to kill them and take over the land. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but this is the way it works. Islam is the most successful political movement of all time. And it expanded by basically, you know, like Muhammad was in the Saudi Peninsula. Why is there Islam from Morocco to, you know, Indonesia? So what I just find peculiar and the lack of intellectual honesty is the only reason Islam is all over this place is because of conquest and battles and war. Here, you have basically a combination of diplomacy and trying like goodwill, you know, or maybe sympathy coming out of the Holocaust, plus conflict and military, you know, back and forths. So it's like, to me, a bit weird that playbook is okay for the spread of Islam, but it's not okay that Israel capitalized on their misery, their genocide. So I've actually said this on and on. I go, it would be really interesting, not in a year or two, but in a decade, to see, can the Palestinians effectively, I don't want to use the word capitalize or take advantage or leverage, but effectively, can the Palestinians use the sympathy that they have, use this very horrible 2-year period. Even if many of them support Hamas, that doesn't matter in this point. I'm just saying they did go through this really added miserable period. So can they kind of do what Israel did or the Jews did to get their nation? I personally don't think so, because coming out of October 7th, something that was very, very like eye-opening for me was we always talk about in the West about two-state solution. Forget I'm saying this. I have not spoken to a single Palestinian. Now, granted, these may be more militant. These are more like they're not. But if you look at polls, many people in Gaza and the West Bank support Hamas. Most of them have zero desire to live side by side with Israel. You're not going to have, necessarily one country that is called like Canaan, which brings them together, because the Israelis don't want to be minority and the Palestinians don't want to kind of crystallize the settlements once and for all and be like, these could stay here forever. But I would say there's practically no Palestinians that want a two-state solution. Their idea is dismantle Israel, despite the fact that it's nuclear powered, despite the fact that it's supported and propped by the West. And yeah, okay, maybe Trump has changed that a little bit. And again, maybe future generations, more like Mamdani and others, are going to say, wait, we're not going to just blindly align with Israel. Sure, we support it, but not at any cost. But that is the missed opportunity now, that Palestinians could actually find a way to get their state. But if they don't change their playbook, then that's just insanity, doing the same thing and hoping for a different outcome.
Do you want to touch a little bit on how the West has influenced the conflict? Because that's something that I'm curious to hear your take on.
Well, the West has, okay, look, this is maybe more because I was born in Iran. So I think America basically used Iran. And geographically, we've talked about why. It's literally between, Africa, Asia, Europe, the Indian Ocean and Russia. So a lot of, the Brits did this, the Russians, but really let's look at America. So when America looked at Iran as its like main ally, a vassal state, for lack of a better word, when in Iran they had the revolution in 79 and they took the embassy hostages, I think it was like inevitable that Iran would break away from America's influence. And so I think America just needed a new ally. And Israel, now about 30 years after its foundation, they kind of said, hey, we're putting up our hand. We want to be that kind of partner. So I understand, like in America, there's always this, like the Jews control America, AIPAC. Yeah, no, there's influence. There's no doubt about it. I've honestly always felt that like America is the one that calls the shots there. And I think with Trump, you're seeing it a bit more, whereas undoubtedly previous politicians were maybe like more fearful of like, well, what if AIPAC then finances my opponent in an election? But I think it's more that, yeah, I think America was always like, well, we need to have like a beachfront in that crazy part of the world. And so partly because Iran severed relations with America, and yes, because on the Arab street, people were really upset about the West supporting Israel, by process of elimination, the West kind of just viewed Israel as an ally, and undoubtedly the Judeo-Christian stuff as well. But I mean, Donald Trump's not religious. You know what I mean? Like American politicians are hypocritical in that sense, that they'll use religion to gain the votes, but I don't think they're maniacal in that sense. So yes, I think one of the reasons why there's this rage on the so-called Arab street is because they view the West as unfair. And that is a fair criticism. If Israel gets 10 billion plus in annual funding, plus indirect subsidies or whatever, yeah, Egypt gets 3 billion a year, but the Palestinians get hundreds of millions a year or whatever. But I think that basically the US shifting from isolationist until Woodrow Wilson in World War I to become expansionist, and its foreign policy was all about expanding and controlling natural resources around the world, and just, basically saying, if there's ruckus around the world, there won't be ruckus here, which is also what Iran did with the axis of resistance. They're like, hey, let's go create some mayhem in Lebanon and Syria and Gaza so that shit doesn't come our way the way Iraq invaded us. So undoubtedly, it's fair to say that in 48 and until 1998 and even 2018, it is a fair argument that would Israel survive financially, militarily, if the West didn't support it? I think that's a very fair, and I think the answer until a certain point was no. But while I've criticized Israel, especially on foreign policy, on many things, I think Israel, what they've done in 75 years, like economically and just in terms of innovation and all that, is pretty impressive. And so, I mean, today they could probably pull it off, so to speak. But this is also why it's important to those who are anti the concept of Zionism to constantly globalize the intifada. Intifada means resistance, effectively. The reason why they want to never put down the rocks, put down the arms, put down the suicide vest is because so long as Israel's not safe to live, then they're hoping that, well, people leave Israel or people just visit Israel, but they live actually elsewhere, And I used to read a lot of demographics that, okay, if all the Arabs continue in Israel, the Muslim Arabs who live in Israel, if they continue to have kids at their rate, maybe at some point the Arabs take over Israel. But that's not really, when you look at the numbers, the Jews will stay the majority in Israel. But if there were to be one country, then the Jews would become in the minority. So that would not work. And which is why Israel also, after October 7th, I think they kind of shed any holding themselves back. And you could argue, you could laugh at that and say, what? You mean holding themselves back when they imprison kids and kill people and build settlements? But they've certainly gone to, another level after October 7th when they kind of feel like, yeah, F it. We're going to do what we want. We don't care what people say, which was the point of my post, that this will harm the reputation of Jews in Israel in the decades to come. Nobody's going to care or remember the Holocaust. It'll just be like, oh, the country that genocided Gaza, basically.
All this said, are you more or less hopeful for peace in that area of the world?
I don't want to be a Debbie Downer. Less, because when I spoke to, when I speak to a lot of people there, people who were physically in Palestine, especially coming out of October 7th, I understand why Palestinians go two-state solution makes no sense. It just restore Palestine or whatever, even if Palestine as a country never existed. It was more of an area. So I don't see any scenario where the Palestinians are like, okay, maybe, we compromise and we'll take what we can get in Gaza and the West Bank. I don't think that's possible. And I do think a lot of critics of Israel point to South Africa with one major difference. So a lot of people say, well, South Africa was apartheid and it was also nuclear power, but it kind of, the situation changed. What's the main difference? The main difference is that the Afrikaners, the Boers who settled, they were Dutch and German or wherever. They're Europeans. And yeah, people are going to say, well, so were the Israelis. But the Europeans that went to Africa, they just picked a plot of land to start a new life. They don't have this maniacal biblical attachment to a land and showing they're willing to kill and do, as the gentleman in the documentary said, kill, rape, and maim to get that land. But I also don't see how the Jews who are Zionist, who especially live in Israel or spend a lot of time in Israel, I don't really understand why they would say, now that we've become this dominant force, why would we give up the status quo? It's a bit like when Iranians who are opposed to the regime go, the West should restore the monarchy. I'm like, I get it, you don't like the republic, and I get it that Iran's history is monarchy and you want this back, but who's restoring it? It's not a reset switch. It's not control alt delete. Donald Trump isn't going to come and issue a fatwa and say, I'm bringing back the Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi. So I'm like, how is that going to happen? So when people make the parallel to South Africa, I'm like, yeah, not really the same thing. And I don't understand why. So if I ever felt like there was a willingness to compromise, then I could kind of in 48 hours come up with a game plan to end hostilities and everybody live side by side. But the reality is, as there's way too many people on the Israeli side that are like, F the Palestinians, especially after 10/7. And there's an insane absolute majority on the Palestinian side that are like, yeah, we're never going to live side by side with these demons. They should go back to Poland, even if, I always go where the Palestinians before Mohammed came along, what were they? They were probably Christian. And before that, they were probably Jewish or pagan or whatever. And they converted, right? But then also there was nomadic movements, right? So it's like both sides have a very limited ethnocentric view of history. And for that reason, I don't have any faith. But if ever one wanted a path to peace, then it's compromise, and it's kind of admitting that you're not going to get everything you want. But if you get 5 out of your 10 wish list, is that good enough?
I guess as a way to wrap it up, I'm just curious, like, why you felt that it was appropriate and important for us to talk about this issue today on this podcast. Because, you see the comments, stay in your lane, watch Mojo, talk about movies and TV. We don't want to hear about this. I'm unsubscribing, et cetera, et cetera.
I mean, first of all, 20 years ago when YouTube was like Manhattan in, the 18th era, 1800s, like I know the YouTube dynamics and psychology. You could dislike a video and you're like, dislike, unsub, die, and you come back the next day. So if we just did what people wanted, well, guess what? We would still be doing cooking videos and travel videos. We would not be doing top 10 lists, just to be clear. 2, I also think that like there's a pyramid of users. There's 1% that are very loud, very vocal, and they are going to complain and whine about something because that's their nature. And you need those people. Like in our company, you might have 1 or 2 people that are always disagreeing and complaining, but then when you just engage them and you address it, you're like, it's not a big deal, right? You have a lot of people who may like or may share, who may be like, okay, I wasn't expecting this from WatchMojo, because our job in media is to keep audiences guessing, informing them, entertaining them. But I've also said it that there's this silent majority, like the people that voted for Donald Trump, that everybody thought was not going to win. And I kept saying it's his election to lose. And he won. So there are a lot more people than you think in life and in media that actually care about things, but they're not the ones that are going to come. I mean, if you watch this and you think this is Hasbara, you're a fucking moron. There's nothing I could do for you, But the final point is more critically to WatchMojo is we look at our stats. We might have had a viewer who was like 10, 15 years ago who was 15. Maybe he or she only cared about Batman and Call of Duty, but that person is definitely more into current affairs, is paying attention to interest rates and, mortgage rates and also conflicts around the world. So I don't think it's that weird. I think in media, when you're a storyteller, you need to have confidence, you need to have conviction, and you need to have the courage to just talk about things. And frankly, for us, I know we put it on WatchMojo for those that care. This was us just wanting to branch out into podcasts. And again, people cover topics that we would not otherwise cover. If I would have done, I sent it to you. I'm very transparent. So last night when we settled to do this topic, I shared with you 10 points that I had started to draft for a top 10 facts about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict that a few colleagues pushed back on a year ago and said, I don't think we should do this. And I didn't fight it. I said, yeah, that's fair. I get it. We shouldn't do that. But if we're going to do a podcast that's talk format, and again, I wouldn't do something on astrophysics. I'm not the guy to talk about, should there be like life on Mars? Should we colonize it? I have my opinion, but I don't know that. But the areas that we cover, whether it's capitalism, these are things that I'm well versed in. But also, I find it shocking that people are dying on both sides and have been dying, and very few people find that area of compromise. And it's either IDF are terrorists or Hamas is terrorists. It's either Israel, Israel Chai, or Free Palestine, River to the Sea. And I'm like, you're all morons, because this is just going to go on for decades and decades. So to those that enjoy it, great. That those that don't enjoy it, we have 10 other freaking videos for you to watch. Like, what more can we do? It's free content. You didn't pay to watch this. It's free.
There you go. We'll leave it at that. So yeah, we'll see what we cover next week. I'm sure we'll deviate a little bit away from the geopolitics and the social politics, but it's always good to see.
And also, if you don't mind, there is one question: nuke the whales. How about we discuss the Hannibal Directive, or when Netanyahu issued a stand-on order on IDF on 10/7? Yeah, I'm a little bit of a conspiracy theorist. I absolutely believe that. I absolutely believe that they always hear things. Sometimes it's false, but it is shocking that this land the size of New Jersey waited hours before the IDF could do anything when you had people in paragliders coming down. So again, I criticize both sides and I give praise to people when need be. I agree that 10/7 was probably, they had some foreknowledge, and they kind of viewed it as an opportunity to not just mow the lawn, but to really take over Gaza. I mean, again, if that's Hasbara, you're a fucking moron to the other person. It's just like, for me, I'm an objective person. Neither side has clean hands. I blame both sides, depending on the topic, more one than the other. But as I said, if you want the killing to end, neither side should expect like total victory. And that I don't think either side is willing to accept.
Yep, I think Inside Conspiracy is on our
list Inside
of possible.
Conspiracy. I think Inside next week we're going to do.
Maybe that'll be next week.
That is next week. Yeah.
If you're down for that, let us know in the comments, and yeah, we'll consider that for next week's episode. So until then, thanks as always, Ash. Great talking to you.
Likewise.
And everybody, take care.
Cheers.